unable to join us and want to have a recording, so we're going to go ahead and record. Feel free, if you don't want to share your camera, you don't have to. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Laura Petty, and I am, let me go ahead and stop this really one moment. I'm going to stop my screen share. My name is Laura Petty, and I am the Development Director here at American Gateways. Thank you so much for joining us on our first ever Impact Call. So this is actually the first time we're gathering together. We really wanted to create a space for our sustaining supporters to hear about the work that we've been doing and how y'all have been a part of this work, and just make sure that you know what's going on the ground. So we really just wanted to show you what has been going on the ground, how our team has been responding to community needs, and how we've been able to do this through your partnership. So this is going to be a really informal gathering. We're going to be together for about 30 minutes, and we'll have a time for question and answer at the end. If you do happen to have any type of questions while we're presenting, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will either answer them immediately or get to them once we get to the end of the presentation. So again, thank you so much. Here is our brief agenda of what we're going to be chatting about today. And then I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to our co-executive directors, Rebecca Lightsey and Edna Yang. Thanks again.
Thank you, Laura. And thanks, guys, for joining us. We thought we would just give you a little insight into what we have been doing recently with your support and the support of so many others. You know, and we, as Laura mentioned, we'll be happy to take questions. You can pop a question in the chat. You can ask us now, or we're going to have some time at the end for questions too. You know, in addition to the pandemic that we've all been living through now for 2 years, where we pivoted all of our services to virtual, the immigration landscape keeps changing. As some of you may know, I joined American Gateways. It's been almost exactly 5 years. And I started right at the same time that the Trump administration took office. And so it was a whirlwind. And we kind of had expected that there were going to be lots of changes. None that we saw were particularly good. But we were able to really respond to all those changes. And then when the Biden administration came in, we were expecting things to slow down a little bit in terms of the changes that we're seeing, and see a little more continuity. I can't say we've really seen that happen. It's been pretty much a real whirlwind. A lot of the change we've seen has been for the better, but certainly not all of it. And Edna's going to talk a bit more about one of the big issues, the Remain in Mexico. We from the positive end, we're seeing the detention facilities remain they're not as full as they were pre-pandemic, but there's still a lot of people being detained. Fortunately, we are seeing more people be released and more quickly, so that's really positive. We're seeing people being released on lower bonds. That's really positive. And we're also seeing people who have very strong claims. We're seeing the government from time to time simply drop those cases, which we think is very appropriate. In fact, just last week or the week before, we had a great victory in Waco, where we had been representing an elderly gentleman who was a longtime legal permanent resident, and he had gone to apply for his citizenship a few years ago and found out that there was a very old criminal charge. And so the government started deportation proceedings against him. They were trying to deport him, even though he had been in this country literally for decades. And he had his family here, and he had built his life here. He had no other criminal issues. And just last week, the government dropped their deportation case against him. So we're just delighted that he is now able to remain here with his family. So that's some of the good stuff that we're seeing. But unfortunately, we are not seeing only good things. You know, first of all, just as a reminder, there hasn't been any changes in the law on the federal level in immigration in I don't remember how long, but a really long time. All of this is changes in policy and practices. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing a real lack of clarity, a lack of planning, and we're seeing a lot of reactionary policies and a lot of vacillation back and forth. For instance, for the young dreamers who would be eligible for DACA, there's been so much change about whether and how they can proceed. MPP, as I mentioned, or Remain in Mexico, that Edna will talk about. All of us here in Texas remember very vividly the Haitians who are coming across the border in Del Rio, and the question of were they were going to be allowed in to claim asylum, then they weren't, and some of them were and some of them weren't. We're just seeing just so many uncertainties and changes in policy that it's really hard to follow through on that. And then finally, there's the Afghan refugees here in here in the Austin area. We've had over 1,000, and some expect us to see about 1,000 more coming in. And we're delighted to be able to welcome these refugees, but they're coming in without their legal status, and they're coming in without the resources to obtain that legal status. So fortunately, with your help and the help of our pro bonos and our volunteers and our amazing VISTA volunteers, we have been able to pivot to help some of these. So we did a clinic for Haitians this fall with our partner Casa Marinella, and we're able to help a number of the Haitians get their temporary protected status paperwork done. We've done some great citizenship clinics out of our San Antonio office. Unfortunately, we had one that we just had to postpone because of weather yet again, but we know that the need is really high and we're able to address a lot of those needs. And then just last Saturday, we had a great clinic for the Afghan refugees here in Austin. And we had great pro bono attorneys who came in to help us with that. Through that clinic, we were able to help 10 individuals and their families. So all totaled, we helped nearly 50 people one Saturday with all of their paperwork. So it's really been really gratifying to see how we can pull all these various resources that we have in the community and all of the partnerships we have and really address some of these issues. So as I mentioned, we can take questions later, but I'm going to turn it over right now to Edna, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about what we're seeing on administration policies, and particularly the Remain in Mexico. So Edna, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Migrant Protection Protocol, MPP, or what folks generally call Remain in Mexico, because I think it's a really clear example of how this current administration has failed to implement what we consider a fair and just immigration system and fair and just immigration policies, right? So what Remain in Mexico has done is it blocked individuals along the southern border from being able to enter the US and apply for asylum. So just the thought of that, I think really kind of is a good example of how policies are affecting the current laws that we have, right? We have an asylum law, but we have policies now in place that block people from actually accessing the ability to use those laws, right? And so we personally as an agency think that it is a program that is not in line with due process and in violation of not only our international obligations, but just our asylum laws in general. It violates those. So President Biden ran the immigration portion of his campaign in large part on a promise that he would end this program. And instead, what we've seen over the last 6 months is an expansion of this program. And that expansion has actually really deeply impacted our work, which I'll talk about in just a second. So the slides that we have up here are a timeline of Remain in Mexico, which kind of will show how complicated and how vacillating the administration has been in terms of trying to stop MPP and the impact that it's had. So Remain in Mexico was a policy that was created by the former administration to essentially take away the right to apply for asylum. So the actual right to actually get before a judge and assert a claim for protection in the United States. And it was one of many policies that were aimed at dismantling our entire asylum system. It created a dangerous situation at the border with migrants that were targeted, they were kidnapped, they were harmed. Our organization represented a number of these individuals who have been ordered deported because they didn't show up for their hearings along the border because they had been kidnapped. So it's a humanitarian crisis that was created in 2018 and has continued even till today. And I think what it also has done is continued to fuel this idea that there was always a crisis at the border. The border has gotten much worse in the past 2 years, and that has impacted what we see in Texas in our work as well. So in February 2021, this administration did try and end MPP. But what happened was that Texas and Missouri decided to sue the Biden administration. And they claimed that MPP was a longstanding policy that should continue, and that the Biden administration essentially didn't talk about the good points of what MPP was. And the district court judge who was presiding over that case agreed with Texas and Missouri. He was also a Trump appointee. So the government did go, the administration went to the Supreme Court and asked that they be allowed to continue their dismantling of MPP while this went through the courts, and the Supreme Court decided to not allow that, upheld the district court ruling, and said that the Biden administration had to continue MPP while the litigation continued. So instead of, I think, really fighting the challenge in court and recognizing the humanitarian crisis that Remain in Mexico has created, what the Biden administration has actually decided to do is expand the program. So it went full speed ahead with Remain in Mexico. It started rebuilding the courts along the border. They started negotiating with Mexico about having migrants remain along the border, and then said that the program would now include individuals from all Western Hemisphere countries. So right before Christmas, the program relaunched in El Paso and San Diego, and then in January, it launched in Brownsville as well. With the expansion of MPP, the administration promised due process, they promised access to counsel, access to legal information, and also safety at the border and faster hearings for everyone. And in order to do that, what they did was approach American Gateways and a number of other organizations across the country who provide immigration information and representation in detention centers, and said, hey, we made all these promises about the expansion of MPP, and we'd love it if you nonprofits would go and provide additional education to individuals at the border and represent these individuals. And we're not going to fund you to do this work. So a coalition of us got together to talk about this ask from the administration. We declined. We didn't think that we wanted to help the administration justify the expansion of MPP. And also, if individuals come to us because they get our information along the border, we're going to provide them with assistance, with education, with representation when we can, but we didn't want to be included in a program that we think is unlawful and really has fueled a humanitarian crisis. So we declined to join any type of list or to expand our services to provide help to those individuals with kind of under the umbrella of the government, right? So what MPP and other policies at the border like it have done is created a huge impact on our work, right? So especially in the detention centers, and what we've seen is a change in population in all the detention centers that we serve. So we serve 4 major detention centers. And in 2021, an example would be our work at the Karnes County Detention Center. So we provided legal orientation, representation, and information at this detention center. And it started out as a family detention center, and then it switched to a detention center that didn't hold all complete families, but instead only men and their sons. And then it changed to hold only women and their minor kids. And then it changed to hold only adult men. And those changes came within 6 months. And the notice to our organization in providing services was only 24 hours or less. The Hutto Detention Center is also a good example. Over Christmas, we got an email on Christmas Eve from the field office director at Hutto from ICE. And they said, hey, heads up, the 500 so women that are detained at Hutto, they're all being transferred to Dilley. And now we're only holding men. And so on the 26th, you'll see several hundred men coming in. and we need you to provide services to those individuals. And the women who had been at that facility, some of them we were representing.
American Gateways.
Some of them we were representing, some of them had pro bono attorneys through our office. So we had to scramble to meet that change as well. What we've also seen are individuals who are not included in MPP because they're not from the Western Hemisphere, right? And so we have a lot more third language speakers, a lot of individuals that that need additional resources, and we are happy to meet that need because our staff are nimble. We've been able to kind of pivot to provide the services that are required and that services that those individuals need. But all of these policies have really impacted the way that we do our work and have caused us to really think about what we need to do to make sure that we can ensure that all individuals that need education, information, and representation get it to the best of our ability. So with that, I'm going to see if anyone has any questions. We can open it up for just general Q&A and a discussion as well.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So you say the Biden administration has actually expanded the Remain in Mexico program, but they're still trying to abandon the program, aren't they? Isn't that scheduled for oral argument before the Supreme Court sometime later this session?
It is. You're right, Mr. Levy. It actually is scheduled for oral argument, and then they'll issue a decision. But the issue that we see with that is that there were things that they could do in between the district court order and the appellate process to actually still implement MPP in some way without expanding it. I mean, they've dumped a number of resources into rebuilding courts, into having more people routed into MPP than would have been before. And I think have created even more of a crisis at the border while they're still going through this appellate process. So I think that really kind of feeds into what Rebecca talked about in the beginning about there not being clear policy about what immigration should look like from the administration, and it instead being reactionary. It being, we made this campaign promise, we're going to go through the appellate process, but at the same time, we're also going to expand MPP and do these things that are kind of contrary to what we're doing through the courts.
Can I follow up very briefly?
Mm-hmm.
So the Supreme Court is reviewing the use of executive power to change immigration policy in a lot of areas. And sometimes the executive has exercised that power without congressional consent, sometimes without going through formal administrative procedures. And, among the cases, there have been the travel ban, there's been DACA. Yesterday, they argued the public charge rule, and then we have the Remain in Mexico. So these unilateral executive actions, sometimes they've worked to stiffen immigration rules, and sometimes they've worked to liberalize immigration rules. Does American Gateways have a position on the extent to which the executive is authorized to use power unilaterally?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think really what our stance would be is that we need legislative action and comprehensive immigration reform. That being said, the executive powers have always been in place to allow for the executive authority to do certain actions that, as long as they're in line with the Administrative Procedures Act, right? As long as they follow the routine that they're supposed to and be announced in the manner that they're supposed to under the APA, I think we don't have any issue with that as long as it's not contrary to any of their existing laws, right? And I would say that some of the executive actions and policies that we've seen over the last 6 years have been, not all of them, but some of them. And I think that they've been used and misused in a way over the past administration to really try and take legislative action instead of like an overarching legislative action, instead of trying to implement solutions to clarify certain parts of our current existing legislation, right? So, I think they should be used sparingly, But I do think that what we would really advocate for is less executive action, executive orders, and more legislative change and comprehensive immigration reform, because that's really what's needed. The last time we had any type of immigration reform was in 1996. We're in 2022, and it's very clear that immigration laws are outdated, which is why we have backlogs and all of these issues that are happening right now.
Thanks.
Got a couple of hands up. I think Walter, you were first.
Oh, first a comment. Hearing about this mess and your ability to manage it just makes me feel better about my own challenges in my work. So I really love and appreciate what y'all do. My question, I was curious, I know a piece of your funding for American Gateways comes from government sources and even some attorney general or federal funding. And has that picture gotten better or worse?
It's gotten a little bit worse on the state level, and it's stayed the same with our federal funding. Unfortunately, they put in a new scheme of billing for the work that we do inside the detention facilities that has been extremely onerous, and that has not changed. So that's another example where we were hoping to see some changes in the new administration that we haven't. We have seen some of our funding from the state that we had been getting to assist survivors of crime. We saw that funding cut. It's simply because of the immigration work that we do. So we really appreciate all of the other support that we get from those of you on this call to make up for those cuts that we're getting. And I should mention, I don't think Edna or I mentioned this, but we are unfortunately only able to serve about 25% of those who come to us for help. It would be a much smaller number that we were able to help if it wasn't for all the amazing pro bono attorneys we have and for all the volunteers that we get. So we are so grateful for that. And we also have some great partnerships. So that really helps us expand our work.
Celeste, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for all the great information about your organization. I've been a longtime fan and supporter. How can we help? What do you need this group to do in terms of next steps? Is it, could we perhaps get like a toolkit or something like that to help us get the message out, or public awareness, or make a donation, or whatever that looks like?
Great question, and I'm going to start. So the first thing is we got Amplify Austin right around the corner. So please remind all of your friends and supporters about that. And we'd really ask everybody to follow us on social media so that we can get the word out. But I think, Celeste, that's a great question, and we really appreciate that. I think keeping yourselves informed on immigration issues and letting your colleagues and your circle know is just so helpful for us and for our work. And then, of course, we always need more donations so that we can work on serving more than that 25% of the folks that we're serving. Laura, Edna, do you have anything else to add?
We also would love to host a get together with your circle. If you have folks who are interested in just learning more about our work or about what's going on in immigration, we would love to do a kind of like this type of meeting, exactly, whether in person or virtual, just to let folks know about who we are and the work that we do.
Can you all, I would love to write the most eloquently worded recap of what y'all said in a very passionate Amplify Austin social media post, but the likelihood of that is small. For some of us might love, I was just checking my email to make sure I haven't missed an American Gateways email go out, but maybe some canned copies of text that we could use for social media that we could get out, because I know one thing I never understood about Amplify Austin is that you can actually be committing now for your day of commitments. And so if you guys can provide us with any snippets, I'm sure many of us would be happy to copy and paste on our various channels.
We can definitely do that, Kendall. Yes, and we'll be posting on our social media as well that you're welcome to share widely if you want to share any of those posts too, but we can definitely provide that.
One question go ahead, Leah. I just talked.
No, go ahead and I'll follow you.
I just was curious about how are y'all able to utilize volunteers or not during the times of the pandemic and with things being more virtual, and just curious how, if you're able to continue mobilizing and using that base or not as much.
I think we've seen a little bit of a decrease, but it's been very, very slight. We get every year about $750,000 in volunteer support with our pro bonos and our volunteers. So we use a lot of volunteer translators and interpreters, and then a lot of pro bono lawyers, like those who helped us at our clinic last week. But also we have pro bono lawyers who are partnering with us on our staff cases. So if you know anyone who wants to volunteer, send them our way, because we have been very successful in transitioning everything to virtual, including our work with our volunteers.
So my question was, together with the coalition of other service providers from around the country that that don't like the MPP program, is there anything that we can be doing to just help solve for that? To either chime in, to let Congress know that we don't like this, to let the administration know that we don't like this? What are the channels that you guys recommend?
I think that's a good question, Leah. There's ongoing litigation, right? The oral arguments before the court are coming up fairly quickly. I think the administration really does have a clear sense that many of us don't like the program. I think in terms of just challenging on MPP, it's more than just that. I think it's voicing this idea that what we need is not just these legal challenges and executive orders, but instead comprehensive immigration reform. I think that is the push that we should look towards, right? If we want a fair and just immigration system that is current, that reflects the changes in immigration and migration to the US, that's what we need to look at, and not a Band-Aid solution of we'll just change this one part of the immigration laws, but instead a real look at our immigration processes and a comprehensive reform of all of those as well too.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be mindful of your time. We're about at 12:30. So if anybody else has any additional questions, we can answer them. And if not, we can thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate y'all again. Thank you so much for being sustaining supporters and for choosing to partner with American Gateways. We appreciate you. We'll be sending out a recording soon. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Bye-bye.